Stoa is a digital campfire where we cohere in dialogue about what matters most at the knife's edge of what's happening now.
Everyone, welcome to the Stoa. I'm Peter Lindbergh, the steward of the Stoa. The Stoa is a place for us to cohere and dialogue about what matters most at the knife's edge of this very moment. And today we have Shinzen Young with us. Shinzen is an American meditation teacher, author of numerous books, including The Science of Enlightenment, How Meditation Works. He's visiting us today to talk about the strange times that we are in and how they can be used as an opportunity to practice one's, put whatever word you'd like to have there, spirituality maybe. So I will take in Shinzen in a moment. How it's going to work. We're going to be here for maybe a little bit after an hour, maybe 75 minutes. Shinzen is going to share his thoughts for around 20-30 minutes, and then we'll pivot to Q&A. If you have any questions throughout, just throw them in the chat. I will call on you and mute yourself. You ask your question to Shinzen. If you do not want to be on YouTube, because this will be on YouTube, indicate that and I'll read it on your behalf. So that being said, I will take Shinzen in. Welcome to the Stoa. You gotta unmute yourself. There you go.
Can you hear me now?
Yep. Yeah, we can hear you.
Right, yeah. And that's my cue?
Yeah.
Excellent. So as Peter said, my name is Shinzen Yang, and I sort of wear two very interesting hats in the world. On one hand, I teach people mindfulness practice that comes from an early experience with Asian languages and cultures, living in Asia, actually being a Buddhist monk, which is when I got the name, and that was a long time ago. So I teach people mindfulness practice, which is essentially equivalent to meditation or contemplative practice, if you want to just sort of speak loosely. On the other hand, I am engaged in research at the University of Arizona, co-directing a lab called SEMA-Lab, which is a neuroscience lab, where, among other things, we look into the brain changes that take place as the result of contemplative practices. And we're trying to discover within the extraordinary abilities of the mystics, meditators, and contemplatives of the world, discover things that we can translate into the common language of formalized science, and then harvest for clinical use, meaning applied use, translation for human problems, hopefully by understanding the mechanisms, the neural mechanisms underlying these extraordinary phenomena, we can then create modern, perhaps technologically boosted interventions that democratize that and make that available to everyone in the world. So if I were to characterize the relationship between my two hats, mindfulness practitioner, let's say, and if you're a mindfulness practitioner that matures, hopefully, at some point into being a mindfulness teacher at some level. In my case, matured into the professional level. That's what I mostly did for most of my life. So the endeavor of being a mindfulness practitioner and the endeavor of being a scientist actually have a lot of similarity. They can actually be described as the same story, but different meaning to the name of the story. On one hand, for the scientist, the story is develop the skills, optimize the happy. in this case, it means develop certain distinct academic skills, and you will have a happy career as a scientist. The skills that I would pinpoint as central for being a happy camper as a scientist, meaning you end up doing important work that is acknowledged. The skills would be mathematical maturity. There's a certain change that takes place after you've just done a lot of math. And suddenly a new sense faculty opens up within you. And you can see in alternate geometries, alternate dimensions, you can literally see infinite dimensional abstractivity. That's mathematical maturity. Physical intuition, you have a specialty as a scientist. You're a chemist, you're a biologist, what have you. As a chemist, you'll eventually learn how to think like a molecule. You'll have a physical intuition, how chemical systems work. As a biologist, you'll have a sense of how to think like Darwin. You'll understand deeply natural selection, and you'll be able to just sort of think like an ecosystem. That's the physical intuition that you get, once again, by massive study and problem solving year after year. Keep doing it, you'll develop this magic ability to just know your field. And the third thing that scientists develop is an extraordinarily successful communication protocol. This is the scientific method. It's described very dryly as description, hypothesis, experiment, analysis. That's what you'll get off Wikipedia. Who needs that? That sounds dry as dust. What this refers to is something amazing. Amazing. It's the second greatest human discovery, perhaps. Well, no, I shouldn't say that. Who knows what the future, but in my mind so far, oh my God, those dry words, describe, hypothesis, experiment, analyze the results. Oh, wow. It's not my topic for today, so I'm not going to go into it, but let me just say that that combination, being very careful about context, being very precise about definitions, being very nuanced about relationships, and using a decentered Bayesian notion of epistemology. All we can do is update, and it's going to be wrong. Everyone's wrong. We're wrong, and that's perfectly fine. That breaks down the bad forms of fundamentalism and creates a very successful form of fundamentalism. We've got some really successful principles of how to talk to each other about stuff. Two names, Alhazen and Francis Bacon, are my heroes. So you develop this clear way of thinking, a clear way of communicating. It's a clear way of thinking to yourself and a clear way of talking to others. And it's within science, it works so, so well. You develop that skill, you develop the math maturity, you develop the physical intuition, you're going to have a stunning career as a scientist. Develop the skills, optimize the happy. for the career, the other career that every scientist has, and the career that you have and I have and every human being has, that's called the career of being a successful human being. Let's think of it that way. So what does it take to be a successful human being? A really, really successful human being? Well, I would say my guess would be two things. First of all, take a lesson from science, and we really, really need to learn how to communicate better. But that's not my topic for today. But that would probably be part of it. If all humans could communicate as well as about human issues in general, as scientists are able to communicate about science issues and even about social and political issues to a certain extent within science, they're less barbaric by far than they are in the, between nations and individuals in the general human setting. Anyway, that would probably be one guess, but my topic for today is the other thing. To be a really successful human being, the other thing is develop focus skills and optimize your happiness across all dimensions of human happiness, everything. So we could characterize, call it contemplative practice, call it mindfulness, call it meditation. As I say, I tend to use those words synonymously. Some people make distinctions, but in general, it can always be characterized in terms of we have a practice system, and that practice system develops certain skills, and those skills turn out to be generic for human happiness. They're the right mixture that works together. Remember, what's magic about science is it's able to take a large class of complicated problems and translate them into a common language, and then that cross-potentiates with the mathematical maturity and the physical intuition, and then we've got this sort of it's good fundamentalism. We've got a fundamental principle that works very well, and part of why it's good is it doesn't take itself too seriously. It knows it's decentered. It's got a very mature, it's got the right kind of humility. Not good fundamentalism. Oh, I've got a general principle, one size fits all, and it can't grow and change, and I can't be wrong. Maybe not so good for the world. So what mindfulness does is it's got an incredibly powerful skill set that is cultivatable. It's not intellectual skills like we do in science. It's attention skills. It's embodied. Concentration power, sensory clarity, equanimity. We can thank India for the great discovery that attentional skills are massively cultivatable. The West sort of got it, but not the way they got it in India, because in India, they went about it systematically. They went about it proto-scientifically, I would say, particularly early Buddhism. And they just did, that's a discovery. It was, I mean, William James famously said, concentration is the most important skill. All other skills depend on it, but sadly, it doesn't seem like we can develop it or cultivate it. I'm paraphrasing, but actually, he was dead wrong. It can be massively cultivated, and that's what the world discovered in the late 20th century when the mindfulness movement started to pervade the mainstream institutions, first of the US and then Europe and now everywhere. So this is very important for humanity. You can translate all of the issues of life into issues related to having skillful relationship to sensory events. Now, don't get me wrong. I'm not saying that you can solve all the issues of life with that method. No, that would be another bad form of fundamentalism. One size fits all, absolutely, always. Oh, no, 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 no. You have to have the right kind of arrogance and the right kind of humility. And in this case, the right kind of humility says, no, of course, we can't solve all human problems by translating them into sensory events and then working with those sensory events. But we can, but this, call it if you wish, technology is relevant to all human problems, but there are many, many other things that need to come into place. And if you want, we will list them. We will tell you exactly what mindfulness doesn't do for you and what you need to supplement it. And I would say if there was one thing that you need to supplement mindfulness with, it would be clear communication skills. Once again, not my topic today, so won't go into that. But it turns out that when you bring a state of concentration, clarity, equanimity, that I misspoke. Shouldn't have said state. We cultivate certain traits that are permanent. In daily life, we're more concentrated, more clear, more equanimous as we're going about ordinary activities than we would have been if we hadn't done systematic training. Oh, the technical definitions of those three terms you can find on the internet. It's just my unified mindfulness. That's the name of this approach to mindfulness. And you'll find all this defined in great detail. The point being, in general picture, that you apply these skills to the sensory challenge, and there's the potential for relief of suffering, elevation of fulfillment, understanding yourself at all levels, positive behavior change, and ultimately fulfillment through service of one form or another. These are the sort of classic goals of contemplative practice. Relief, fulfillment, insight, mastery, service. There's sort of the surface level of those things, and these skills help for that. I think communication skills help more for surface happiness, but mindfulness skills also are related to surface happiness, ordinary concepts of happiness. Get what you want, figure out the stuff you need to figure out who you are psychologically, what's my story, etc. The ordinary things that people ordinarily think about as happiness, mindfulness skills are relevant to that. As are, I believe, extraordinary communication skills. However, where mindfulness really shines, and this is where finally we come to my assigned theme of strange times, where mindfulness really shines is for the deeper forms of relief, the deeper forms of fulfillment, the deeper forms of know yourself, the deeper forms of skillful action, the deeper forms of service. That's where things like mindfulness really shine. And strange times could be simply interpreted as, well, one certainly times of rapid change can be under the rubric of strange times, very rapid change. And times when things fall apart, which inevitably they do. Institutions fall apart, human bodies fall apart. When change is happening fast and bad shit is also happening, we need to, yes, act effectively. I think communication skills are the key to that. But we also have to, we're called to do something else, something deeper, a deeper love, to love deeply, to love at the level of primordial completeness of our soul. Mindfulness skills make those deep forms of relief, fulfillment, insight, mastery, and service, the ones that are extraordinary, the ones we're trying to study in the lab, those abilities allow you to love deeply in strange times, as I'm describing them. That can interact with acting effectively and improve the world. So what we've observed in the meditation, at least in our meditation community, is that COVID has been a boon in some ways, to strangely, to many of my students. I see them prospering. Pascal said all your problems come from the fact that you can't just sit in a room and be happy. You don't have extraordinary happiness. You don't have happiness independent of conditions. Well, mindfulness says happiness independent of conditions is cultivatable to an extraordinary degree. And let's not forget, it doesn't make you indifferent to conditions. So it's a win-win situation. So I would say that I am done with what I needed to say. Peter, shall we let people interact?
Yep. So if you have any questions, start putting them in the chats. I'll call on you. Just unmute yourself and ask your questions, Shinzen. I guess I'll warm you up with a few questions. I was wondering if you could speak on community and communities of practice. We have the Monastic Academy folks coming in tomorrow. And
oh, yeah, really? Really? Come on. Was that just a coincidence, or was that you wanted me and then them?
You're the warm-up act for the Monastic Academy.
Oh yeah. Oh, who's on
I
tomorrow?
think I think Peter Park is coming with Tashin. So you might be there. But they're doing a
Great.
quarterly thing here at the Stoa, so we have a connection with them.
Seriously, that is so great. Wow, no, I didn't know about that.
And so I imagine you're well aware of them, and then how they have a great sense of community there and an ecology of practice that's forming. Can you speak more about these in-person communities that are happening, and as well these digital ones and the potential there, such
Yeah,
as the Stoa?
it's very interesting. Creation of community is not something in general that I have much special knowledge of. So it's not in my specialty. I would say what is most interesting to me personally right now is the possible digital community. You're talking about something else, which is these, smaller communities that may actually be together physically. But of course, there's a link between them, isn't there? Because what we found is now that our retreats are international, because we run retreats over the internet, and it works. Oh, it works so well because you're in your house. There's no, oh, I'm going to transition to life. You did your retreat in the middle of life. It's a very effective way of training. But because of that, we're reaching the whole world at once. But what we're seeing is, first of all, there's the possibility of online networking, of course, and that's very easy to master, to manage or arrange. But then what we're seeing is there'll be a group in a city that was on an international retreat, and they all connect up and they do a munch, or they go out or something, and they were living in, they didn't know each other, but they shared a city digitally, and now they shared a retreat digitally, and they share a city, so it actually is creating local community. Anyway, it's not my specialty, so maybe I can contribute by backing up and giving a broader context within which we might consider community. So I mentioned, we could look upon science as a kind of practice system. And certainly mindfulness, meditation, and such. Well, actually, let's back up. Let's really back up. I misspoke when I said you could characterize meditation, mindfulness, contemplative practice, etc., in terms of develop the skills, optimize the happy. That's not quite the whole picture. So let me complete the picture. First of all, some people have spontaneous enlightenment and mystical experiences without previous cultivation, which indicates to me that these dramatic and or profound effects that people get from meditation practice are natural because they happen spontaneously to people who don't meditate. So we're cultivating might be more like just releasing something or seeing something that's already there. So it's actually not about cultivating skills. Or if it's a skill at realizing how skillful your depths have always been. And that's the second aspect. Some people that teach meditation will tell you it's not a path to a place because you're already in that place. You're sitting there to express. This is Soto Zen in Japan, for example. Rinzai Zen says, you're clueless, and we're going to give you the clue. It might take about 15 years in a monastery. Soto Zen, the other Japanese Zen school, says you're already there. Yeah, we sit a lot, but it's just to express the fact that we're already there. So there's you're already enlightened and there's no cultivation fact. And then there's the fact that people get these things, have some extraordinary things happen that latch, sometimes even. So it's not strictly just about develop the skills, except it is, because for just about everyone, your best shot at this is to have a systematic practice. And even people for whom it happens spontaneously end up with a systematic practice once they find other people that have had those experiences. Those people got it through practice typically. And the other thing is, even people that tell you there's no practice, they give you a practice. They're just changing the words. I have one of my techniques I give people is called do nothing, right? So it's a non-meditation, meditating meditation. So, okay, but if we sort of look at a practice system, what are the elements of a practice system? You referenced community. That's right, because humans practice. So there's going to be a dimension of community, but for mindfulness to become truly international, that has to be very flexible, because in some countries different countries have different social setups, and something that is very taken for granted in one country may actually, a social ordering that is taken for granted in one country may actually be somewhat contentious in another country. So I think we need a lot of different kinds of social structures, and there's that. But there are other components in a practice system. The first thing that comes to my mind is there's a technique set. If you don't have a technique, you don't have a practice. If you're not doing exercise, you're not building muscle. So there's a technique set, there's a technique structure, there is a training structure, retreat practice, life practice, and so forth. Yeah, there's a social structure. Often with a practice system, there will be a possibility of boosters to the practice. For example, the most prevalent form of mindfulness in mainstream US is MBSR, mindfulness-based stress reduction. That has a booster. It has yoga mixed in with it. I mean, it helps. It helps a lot, but it's not part of traditional mindfulness practice. Now we're talking about maybe microdosing with psychedelics or neurofeedback. At our lab, we're looking into low intensity focused ultrasound for neuromodulation to enhance neuroplasticity that then would help with the techniques and the practice structure. So you can have boosters. So you have a technique structure, which might be one exercise or a whole raft. You have focus techniques structure. You have a training structure. Here's what I do each day. Here's what I do month to month. You have some sort of social network, for sure, related. You have possible boosters that are helping your practice. And let us not forget, at the center of this is a conceptual map that links the four things I just mentioned to some ultimate goals. Why, what's the purpose of this training? And if you ask me to sum it up, I would say to be happy in the broadest, deepest, most intense, and scalable way. It's happiness. But just really, really big concept of happiness. That's a big claim. But it actually, remember, the humility behind the claim is this isn't the whole answer by any means. The other thing is, yeah, well, that's enough. I think I've addressed your question.
Cool. Thank you. So we're going to pivot to the questions in the chat now. Matthew, you had a question. If you can unmute yourself and ask it.
Yeah. Hi.
Hi, go ahead.
Hi. Yeah, I was wanting to ask about like maybe effects that people wouldn't be aware of when they start practicing, even going to like adverse effects, or it can, you know, possibly cause disruptions that are, yeah, kind of unforeseen and significant.
Would you like me to give you a classification of the adverse effects, how to prevent them and treat them?
I mean, if it's such a thing.
Huh? Say what?
If it's such a thing. I mean, yeah, that would be.
Oh, well, there is in my system. Yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
sure, there is in most systems. They have to. Of course, they deal with it. And no, this is part of the conceptual map. Here's the old goodies. Here's all the good stuff it's supposed to do. Here's the old baddies. Here's the problems that are known traditionally. Here's the things you do to militate against those problems from the get-go, the prophylactic measures that you take with practice. Here's the curative measures that you take if these problems develop. This is like clinical medicine. We know problems are going to develop. Aspirin's great. You can buy it anywhere. People get sick from aspirin. You don't believe me? Look at the Wikipedia on aspirin. You'll see all the organs that can be affected by it. If, I guess it's genes or whatever, but but you can buy it in any store, but it will make some people sick. It's just, it helps so much more than it hurts. And when mindfulness is done under competent guidance, it helps a lot more than it hurts. But we still need that page about aspirin that says, hey, be aware of this. So the problem is, as soon as we start talking about the negatives, it just scares people a lot because they tend to assume it's going to happen to me, right? It's like, well, he says that's not very common, but I know I'm going to be the one that gets this or that. So let me see if I can summarize really, really quickly. Sometimes everyone knows some of this, but you asked about the ones that maybe people don't know about. So let me see if I can run through most of them. You can have some emotional material come up that might be a little surprising or a little intense. There is the mild version of that, which I would say happens to most meditators. Then there's the extreme version of that probably is not going to happen unless you do extreme practices or you're just an very unusual case. There's an extreme intense terror and grief and all sorts of stuff that we technically call the dukkha jnanas, if you want to look it up, D-U-K-K-H-A-N-Y-A-N-A. I think I spelled it right. Okay, that's the extreme. It happens under extreme circumstances. But some manageable but a little surprising emotional sensitivity turmoil that might happen. Flatness might happen. Here's what I mean by flatness. It's a good news, bad news situation. Good news, I'm not miserable like I was before. And I'm not confused like I was before. And I'm pretty tranquil. Bad news, just don't quite have the old bounce. Don't have that edge. Don't have that motivation to go out there and get shit done or win one for the Gipper that I used to have. I'm sort of flat. That might happen. Don't worry, that's not bad. That's easy to take care of. All the details of what I'm talking about are free on the internet. Go to any of our websites and it's just in excruciating detail. I'm just giving you the top page summary. You might have an extreme form of flatness. Very rare, can be dealt with, but in Buddhism, it's called falling into the pit of the void. And in psychiatry, it's got a close cousin called DPDR, derealization, depersonalization disorder, which pretty much sums it up. It's Enlightenment's evil twin. Hello? Can't hear you. Hello?
Go ahead, Matthew.
Oh, sorry. Sorry, can I actually ask about that DPDR on a personal note?
Yes, but maybe after I finish, because I'll forget what I was going to say.
Yeah. Sure.
We could talk about that. The reason I'm laughing is I made the mistake of talking about this on YouTube a couple years ago, and I don't have the resources to help people. If you have this, I can explain it to you, but people just inundated me to try to, and I felt bad. I can explain it, but I don't email me to help you with it. But do email Michael Taft. Peter, have you ever had Michael Taft on? You should have him on. He'll tell you exactly how to cure DPDR. He did it. Of course, it's anecdotal, but he used my techniques with someone that actually had the diagnosis. But that was probably just luck. You can have him on the show if you want. Anyway, other problems could be what they call spiritual bypassing. And that can be dealt with. Then there's a really serious problem. Oh my God. Doesn't happen often, but I hate to say it, but we have to say it. You can use these things to become psychopathic if you want. Merciless killer. You can use attention training to do that, and it's been done. So, meditation in the service of psychopathy. Very, very bad idea. But a little bit of spiritual bypassing, we can deal with that. Energy, we call it impermanence in Buddhism. But if people can have these intense experiences of energy that are what we call bhanga or dissolution. And if that can be blissful, hellish, or both, because it's purgatorial. And part of the hellish part can be what they call kundalini crack up. So some people have difficulty with insight into impermanence. initially manifests as energies that are, and once again, all of the above can be dealt with. The main thing is just to know about them, and from the get-go to have some techniques that are good for dealing with them. So in our training at unifiedmindfulness.com, this is actually part of the training. You get this list. You're taught to spot the symptoms, the mild, because it's mostly going to be mild, and to deal with it. It's very systematic. So like I say, to talk about this scares people, but if we don't talk about it, we're not being honest. You wanted to talk about DPDR? I mean, it's fine with me. It's,
Well, I don't know if it was just an experience I had, and it was kind of something that I just wanted to maybe get clarity on.
Yeah, go ahead.
And it was actually before I did any mindfulness or meditation or anything. So it was like I was in a really bad state, just in life in general. And I was just doing this thing where I felt like, okay, I just need to do whatever my body wants, just do impulsive things and just go, just send it, kind of, in a way. And then I was looking out at the water, and it seemed like everything was paper thin. And I felt this deep, like, black abyss terror feeling. And it was like the most scary thing I've ever felt in my life. And yeah, and I felt super ungrounded after that, I think. I'm just wondering what you think about that.
I think you had a good experience. That's classic. All three of the things you said. The world gets feather light and paper thin. There's a sense of being unfixated, and there can be different representations of emptiness, like blackness, vastness, but there's also the thinness, which is contractive. It's yin yang. The veil became very thin for you. It sometimes happens like that in a time of great stress, where you just sort of let go of everything, and a deeper ordering principle appears. Actually, I'll tell you, some of the most recent work in the neuroscience with the psychedelics, but also with what we're doing, we believe, with the ultrasound, is based on this idea that there's something natural in the system that if you let go in the right way, it just reorganizes. So what happened was you let go in a certain way because you were just desperate. And this is a common scenario. In fact, in certain kinds of practice, Rinzai Zen, for example, the teacher may mercilessly drive you to desperation and forcing you to have that experience. So you just let go, and you got right to the edge of the cliff. So close, in fact, that you actually saw, for just a second, you saw what enlightened people see. For real, good, that's a good thing. If someone tells me I went into this really deep state and then, when I hear that structure, I give it 80%. I know exactly what the and then is going to be. And the and then is most likely going to be the and then that you gave me. I got terrified. I was afraid. That's the usual result of, no, I won't say that. That's a common reaction to the first glimpse of elastic identity. Common reaction is fear. There's a reason why fear tends to arise, but I don't know what it is, although I have a conjecture. I'm not going to go into it, but I've talked about that at length elsewhere. But the fact is, I will give you a general principle on this path. If you're on a path that is a life meditation path, it can be inside or outside of a religion. If you're on a life meditation path, there's a fundamental principle to keep in mind. Inevitably, the self and world go away. Inevitably, the self and world reappear. They go away in a lot of different ways, many, many, many ways. They reappear in many, many, many ways. You had a significant way that self and world can disappear. Self and world almost disappeared in the most significant way for you. Good. Inevitably, self and world do disappear in some way or another. For Obama, for Trump, for you, for me. But inevitably, self and world reappear. And typically, or not infrequently, the first time, the way that the self reappears is, shit, what the fuck was that? Either so tripped out and delighted that you aren't there anymore, or you're scared and you're not there anymore. Either is fine, either is natural. You didn't do anything wrong. It's Darwin. It's nature, it's life. The deep mind doesn't know what that is and equates it with death. But it's not. You're not dying. You're not even in danger. You're just sitting in your room. But it takes quite a while for the depths to make the logic. See, it's probable that the natural way to die is to just let go of everything. And it's probably, at least as far as I have seen, guiding people through dying, doing that. It's the premier window for liberation. I think that the deep mind somehow knows when it's time to die, I'll just let go of everything. But then makes a little mistake. The surface decides to let go of everything, and the deep mind for a minute thinks, I'm dying. What is it? It's not. It's just you're letting go of everything. And so if you continue with the pillars of practice, retreat practice, life practice, get support, give support, it is not guaranteed, but it is highly probable that you'll come to this experience again. but you'll know it because you've been prepared. Your practice is deeper. You have a conceptual, I've given you a conceptual framework. I'll tell you what to do. When the fear arises, you apply a technique. It's like any other emotion. Mental image, mental talk, body, emotion, see, hear, feel. Mindfulness brings you to your senses. Have a full appreciation of manifesting a frightened self. So fully manifest a frightened self that it can't stick you or hold you. And then guess what? You go right back to a deeper experience of transcending self and world. It's now clearer. The quicker and louder you say yes to the reappearance of self and world, the deeper and clearer will be the no, 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 that inevitably follows. So it's classic. We deal with it all the time. And congratulations, and keep up your practice. And no, that's not DPDR. That's just a baby Kensho. They have a phrase in Kensho, Jianxing in Chinese. It means see your nature. It's like the first enlightenment experience. Anyway, that was a little hint. In terms of the ox herding pictures, you actually saw the tail of the ox. You didn't see the ox. You certainly didn't get on the ox or ride the ox home. But you saw the tail of the ox. So that's a good beginning. Is that enough?
Yeah.
Yeah, DPDR would be if you got sucked completely into the emptiness and continued to be terrified all day and all night and couldn't integrate it. And spent the rest of your life trying to get back to the somethingness, not understanding the kinds of things that I'm now talking about. So I conjectured that since we guide people through these things, we're not afraid of it. Competent mindfulness teachers are not afraid, are not timid that their student is going to encounter something. First of all, we prepare them, and secondly, we try our best to support them. But yeah, so that's not DPDR. Okay, that was actually just the beginning of the end of spiritual childhood.
Cool. All right, so let's, we're at the top of the hour. Let's sneak in maybe one or two more questions.
Sounds good.
Evan, you're up.
All right, thank you, Shinzen. I've enjoyed your work immensely. I just want to say that as I scroll way back up in the chat to find the question that I typed to you. So the question is this. I would be interested to know your thoughts on the way that market dynamics and a culture with severely compromised attentional skills, meaning our culture, even compared to the previous Western baseline of, say, 30 years ago, have affected the offerings in the mindfulness space in America. It seems that market dynamics select for, in many cases, a certain shallowness of presentation and also teachers who don't expect very much from their students. This also, I think, explains why Western teachers tend to de-emphasize the possibility of actually achieving abiding mental phase transitions. So I'm curious if you have thoughts on the best way to walk the knife's edge of delivering the deeper teachings, as well as being able to make ends meet financially, since our culture has no concept of giri.
Giri? You use the Japanese word?
Yes. Exactly.
G-I-R-I? Oh,
yeah.
Cool.
I've also studied Mikyo.
Yeah, you've obviously studied a lot. Are you an academic? I just
no, I'm a college dropout that's been practicing Vajrayana for about 18 years.
Wow, my kind of guy. I'm sort of a college dropout. My parents thought I was when I didn't get my PhD and started meditating. Took a leave of absence and never went back. Wow, that is a very intelligent question. Market dynamics is an interesting phrase. I mean, I think I know what it means. Who uses this terminology?
Well, what I'm referring to is the sort of incentive structures that are created by a consumerist, specifically market capital system. So, for example, teachers, even if they have very deep and correct insight into the way that these sorts of paths work, seem to be incentivized by their financial incentives relating to making money to offer presentations that are more fit for broader consumption. In other words,
Can you give me some specific? Yeah, can you give me specific examples?
Well, one of the main examples that I would give is just the overall state of yoga teaching in this country, where it focuses almost entirely on just one or two of the limbs. And there exists, you know, of course, yoga is just as complete a path of development as Buddhism or anything else like that. And yet most people in America don't even know that, because the market has selected for yoga teachers that teach gentle physical exercise and not much else.
Interesting. And actually, though, I still have the question, did you make up that phrase, market dynamics, or is that a term?
No, I don't know where I got that phrase from, but what I'm, dynamics refers to the sort of ways that systems move, and the market is the system whose dynamics I'm referring to.
Very interesting. Of course, dynamical systems are a big deal for people that do the kind of science that I have pretensions of doing. So you got my attention. This is interesting. Can you give me another example?
So you've probably heard the phrase McMindfulness.
Yes, I have.
I would gesture in that broad direction. I can elaborate more if you want.
Tell me what would be examples of McMindfulness. Once again, I've heard the expression.
So the sort of framing where we do mindfulness to relieve stress, right? We do mindfulness to relieve stress. So, and the sort of subtext in a lot of these approaches, or corporate mindfulness programs are another example of this, because mindfulness is seen as an instrumental tool to make people better able to adapt to the frankly terrible cultural conditions that we live in, where we're measured on productivity and capitalist sense and so on, right? So when you present people things in this way, it can serve as a weird sort of inoculation against the deeper stuff, because they feel like they get the point of it. The point of it is to be less stressed. It's just a version of a benzodiazepine with fewer side effects.
You know who Arthur Koestler was?
Mm-hmm.
That name?
Yeah.
Now you further impressed me. Most people wouldn't. So was it called The Lotus and the Robot? It was his. So if you don't know who Arthur Koestler was, actually, I don't know either. All I know is he was an important intellectual, and he was what do they call that? When someone loses their faith in something,
an apostate?
Not exactly an apostate, disillusioned. I think he was a disillusioned Marxist. Am I correct? I don't really, I'm only, you'll see in a minute why I'm referencing this person. Because he said an interesting thing relative to what you're saying now. So he visited Japan, I think in the 60s, maybe before. And I could have this all wrong, but I think he might have been searching for something after realizing that Marxism wasn't the answer to all the problems in the world. And he wrote a book about his journey to Japan where he talked to Zen masters as possibly another, like, okay, maybe there's just something else here. Once again, this may be very false memory, but I do believe that there is a book called The Lotus and the Robot. And I remember reading it. And he said something interesting. So at that time, this must have been the 50s, because Japanese were starting to use taranki. Taranki is the word for tranquilizer. That, and I guess it was faddish in Japan at that time, taranki. And Koestler's phrase was, Zen is the taranki of feudalism. So someone else said it before you. But they said it not with respect to our culture, but with respect to the feudal culture. So Zen allows you to be okay in an unfair society. So this is a huge conversation. This is not a 10-minute conversation.
Sorry about
And
that.
it's, oh no, don't be sorry, be arrogant. Be know that this is an important conversation. And have some confidence that communication may happen on these items, but not in 10 minutes, that's for sure. So, because it touches to many things. Ascription of causality is a very, very tricky area in human communication. And that there is watering down has always happened. That there is something put around, and then something more put around, and something more put around the core experience. That's always happened. Cuculus non facit monachum. A robe doesn't make you into a monk. Very few Buddhist monks know how to meditate, folks. Hate to tell you. Is that a shock? Very, not to you, but maybe, very few Buddhist monks have a clue how to meditate. That's for starters. There's always been this, but it differs culture to culture. I mean, I was at a meeting of a lot of hundreds of people that were Buddhist teachers in the West. And the McDharma thing came up, and the market mindfulness thing came up, and the contradictions of late stage capitalism came up, and the blah, 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 blah. It all came up, what you're talking about. And the ascription was primarily laid at the feet of something called capitalism. And then someone said, well, you know, way before they had capitalism, they had ways of watering down Buddhism big time for centuries. And they started to talk about McDharma before McDharma, when it wasn't the contradictions of late stage capitalism can explain everything that's wrong with America. People try to convince me that's true. That's bad fundamentalism, folks. Don't buy that. If you don't buy the preacher that says the Bible actually happens, if you think that's bullshit, you rev up the sensitivity on your fundamentalist bullshit meter, would be my suggestion. But there's good fundamentalism too. We want that. Basic principles, a couple of them that work well together. Anyway, someone, wasn't me, fortunately. I was about to, but someone beat me to the punch and started to list the bullshit present in traditional Asian Buddhism. And oh my God, did that cause a reaction? Do you want me to start? Do you want me to make a shitstorm? Maybe not.
It's been done before.
It's been done before. Why bother? Why bother? Right. So talk to me about MacDharma, and I'll talk to you about something you don't want to hear, because you may be misascribing causality. The causality may be partially what you're talking about, but other things have entered in the past to produce similar effects. The main one, well, anyway, I have a, God, where is it? I have this thing I call the happiness grid. And it's basically a periodic table of the dimensions of human happiness, and from the perspective of mindfulness, though. Like, here's what mindfulness can do for you for happiness, here's what mindfulness can't do for you, and here's how that works. And I have long talks on the internet and articles where I go through the happiness grid and I try to tease out how we can have a formulation that is mainstream in the sense that it doesn't set up any barriers to any major community. We need to have a universal paradigm. You can't have a version of mindfulness that appeals to people that vote for Obama and turns away people that vote for Trump. You can't have that. And God damn it, don't call it diversity when you do that thing that I just said. Please do not call that diversity. Call it whatever you want, call it political expedience, or call it affirmative action that needs to be done in order to correct a mistake from the past. Call it that, I won't yell at you. But call what gets in the way of diversity, it's going to get someone angry. In fact, it's going to get half of America angry at you. Angry enough to become quite distorted, in case you didn't notice. Oh, but that's not my fault. That's because those people have always been that way. I don't know about that. So anyway, I go into excruciating detail on an idea for how we can have something really universal. It's going to fly in the People's Republic of China just as well as it flies in Tehran under the Ayatollahs. So you can't put up any barriers, and you can't go against science. You're going to lose. You might win a battle, but you're going to fucking lose the war. Pardon my French.
No worries.
Here's how we create, here's an idea, a guess, won't even elevate it to a conjecture. Here's a guess how we could have our cake and eat it too. Have a universal formulation without losing the spiritual clout or the ethical impact without losing those, and consonant with science, and available and puts up has minimal overhead that's going to rub someone the wrong way, not only in terms of content, but also in terms of presentation. Presented in a language that doesn't, I don't know, just not seem quite right to people because it seems slanted to one community or another. And it's very easy for that kind of language. I mean, I'm in favor of compassion. I want to train compassion, but maybe people that think Trump's a good idea, when I say we should, you need to be trained in compassion, maybe they hear that as something very different from what, you know, maybe I need to call it something. Service, what's service? Military service, that's service. Yeah, it's not just soup kitchens. That's why I like service. It cuts both ways politically in the US. So I have a guess as to how we could have our cake and eat it too. It's called unified mindfulness, if you want to, and it's complicated. It'll take some patience, but it's my best guess. So, wow, great question. Thanks for that one.
Cool.
Peter,
Thanks for engaging.
back to you.
All right. So one more question, then we'll end it.
Wrap it up. Yep.
Yeah. Okay. So I'm gonna someone had a question about the military's use. Ryan, you still here?
Yep, still here.
Yeah.
Yeah. How's it going? This has been really fun. Thanks, Shinzen. Super fresh. Yeah, so I was hoping, you were mentioning some of the darker sides of what mindfulness, darker states that mindfulness can kind of open up to. And you mentioned psychopathy. And so I was hoping you could speak a little bit to the use of mindfulness in weaponized settings, such as the use of MBSR in military.
Oh, forget about MBSR. I'm totally into the Army.
yeah.
If you think there's guilt there, I'm guilty.
Yeah.
I advocated this from the get-go.
Sure, yeah. And
in fact, I can remember when John Kabat-Zinn
yep, that's what
was
I'm referring
dead
to.
against it. And I remember saying, let's think this through. Let's not just reject this offhand. And he changed. I was surprised. He changed, as far as I can tell. So, yeah, I have a lot to say about that and no time because it's a very controversial subject. But
I was wondering if you could get a
yeah.
little bit into what your group is doing. So like you're using ultrasound to amplify, to be a booster for mindfulness. And I was actually just enrolled, I actually dropped out of a program at the University of Pittsburgh, a master's program for sports science. And there in their Warrior project, they're using transcranial magnetic stimulation to help improve resilience, is what they called it. And they're targeting the adrenal medulla to downregulate or upregulate the adrenal medulla in.
Whoa. Hold on a second. They're directing TMS to, it's not TMS on the brain.
It is, yeah, it's on the brain. And then they're using.
Well, you said the adrenal.
Yeah, so they're targeting it on the brain to work on the adrenal.
Okay.
Yep,
okay. They're working on the. Yes, I understand. Now I understand what you're talking about. Yeah, well, transcranial magnetic stimulation is a non-invasive way of modulating brain activity by placing a rapidly oscillating coil near your scalp, and that rapidly changing current causes a rapidly changing magnetic field, which then induces a current through the brain that sort of is like a little bit of a wave that has an impact, but is not well focused, unfortunately, and difficult to control with aiming. But you can hit cortical areas by placing, so you can control the surface a little, the effects on the surface brain a little better, much better actually, than you can control the effects in the depths. So there is a similarity between ultrasound and TMS in that they are both non-invasive and involve modulating brain activity. There are several really big differences, though.
Do you mind if I interrupt for just a
yeah,
sec?
go ahead.
I think what I'm trying to get at is maybe not the difference between what you're doing and what they're doing, but is the use of modifiers or boosters that help brain states and
okay, I understand the question.
Psychopathy or some types of states that are preferred for or selected for in military, like you know, you mentioned some disassociation or dispassion with mindfulness, and so like boosting states that might be termed psychopathy in normal society.
Yeah, my experience with the military is the last fucking thing they want in the world is to create psychopaths. Yeah, they are they have tests to make sure you're not a psychopath. That goes back to World War I, I think. That was I'm not an expert in their culture, but that's just the limited contact I've had with the Army Research Lab and people at Walter Reed and so forth. They do not want those kinds of people at all. So let me tell you how it started. And maybe this isn't known, actually. A little oral history. And by it, I mean mindfulness in the US military. As far as I know, it goes back to a remarkable woman named Elizabeth Stanley, who described herself to me as someone who has worn two uniforms that very few people have worn both. An officer in the United States Army uniform and a Theravada nun in Burma uniform. She comes from, I believe, a 7th generation military career family. She knows the culture of the military like I know the culture of mindfulness. And she was in actual combat in Bosnia. So she actually knows what happens in the field. And she saw bad shit happen because of bad judgments in the field. And we also know that when people come back from combat, they called it shell shock. And now they call it PTSD. People come back really damaged. So she realized that Sure, we don't want to have militaries. We don't want to have wars. But if we have a military, then they should make good decisions by best practice. And they're good decisions. Our military is not some sort of militia that just comes into your village, and it's professional, it's trained, and they have practices to prevent collateral damage. They don't want to hurt people. It's to no one's advantage, other than, of course, lethality in combat is totally, that's what we're into, but we don't want non-combatants to be hurt, and we certainly don't want our people to come back having served, and now they're messed up for life, and they mess up their family, and they mess up, and they mess up, and they mess up. This isn't right. So if we're going to have these institutions, she knew from her experience, mindfulness skills are not going to make you a better baby killer. The Army doesn't want to make baby killers. It's going to make you a better human being after your discharge. You learn mindfulness in the military, a life skill you could use your whole life. It's going to militate against coming back a wounded warrior, spiritually wounded. It's going to militate against illegal actions and poor judgment in the field. I thought this was a very good idea. If and only if everyone involved sees everyone, the military itself, and this, I have delivered this message loud and clear to anyone who's willing to listen. In the military, when they ask me or I consult, this is not mindfulness training for soldiers. This is mindfulness training for human beings who happen to right now be soldiers. And the job of being a soldier is both a situation within which it is pretty easy to teach people these skills, because they have to they're living in a monastery anyway. And it's a situation where they really need these skills. So yeah, we can say, oh, well, it could be misused. You can say that. But you could also say it's much more likely that that the positive will outweigh the negative. Everything in my experience of personally working with this area tells me that the US military sees it this way. And that's good. And any other military that sees it that way, hey, I'll talk to you too.
All right. I think it's prudent to end here at the bottom of the hour. Shinzen, any closing thoughts for us today?
No, I think I probably said too much already.
Well, it was definitely a pleasure having you here and engaging with us at the STOA. A few closing announcements before, but thank you so much. I just wanted to send gratitude and love your way for coming to the STOA. And Shinzen mentioned Michael Taft. He was at the STOA recently, so I just popped that video on the YouTube. I think it was Matthew who was inquiring in regard to that. As I mentioned, tomorrow we have the Monastic Conversations with the Monastic Academy. That's at 12 p.m. Eastern Time. And then after that, we have Escaping Narcissism, Experiencing Layers of Listening. Theodore, let's see if I can pronounce his name, Tiklis. He invented a conversational modality called Entangled Bodies, and we're going to explore that. We also have something you might be interested in this, Shinzen. We have Dharma Battles, a new series coming up where we're going to get kind of teachers come in and do Dharma combat. Daniel Thornton and then Benito Roy and I are working on that. So I'll loop you in if that's something of interest. Yeah, Evan, if you want to plug your new series that's or new thing that's coming up.
Sure. So I'm going to be making an essay in the original sense of an attempt at a sort of dialectical synthesis of the best insights of Western information physics, that worldview, and the sort of Vajrayana view of reality as a living, creative, and magical thing. The name of the series is called The Bridge. It is inspired by David Chapman's article, A Bridge to Meta-Rationality versus Civilizational Collapse. And so the presentation will be aimed at people who have a grounding in a Western scientific worldview, who sometimes have trouble approaching seriously the deeper practices and phenomenological tools found within the spiritual traditions due to the impression of woo or perceived, epistemological, ontological, or metaphysical incompatibilities in the way that these practices are presented or grounded in their original traditions. So it's going to be an exploration of how to synthesize these things in a way that can empower ourselves and hopefully help us deal better with the meta crisis that our society is facing. So anybody's interested in that, working on getting that all together, and it should be up hopefully soon. Super
cool. Thank you, Evan. So we have tons of events coming up. Thestoa.ca. We have a Patreon if you'd like to support us, and then Substack if you'd like to follow with updates. So that being said, Shinzen, everyone, thank you for coming to the Stoa today.
Bye, everyone.
Here.